Welcome back to Horrifying Stories. If walls could talk, I wonder what secrets they'd tell. Katie Beers was a young girl who was found in a dungeon behind the walls of a house in Long Island, New York. And this is her horrifying story. Viewer discretion is advised. Abandoned by her mother, Marilyn, at a very young age, Katie Beers was left under the roof of her godmother, Linda Guillory. Unbeknownst to Katie, her mother's betrayal was only the beginning of the many betrayals she would experience in her life. Her godmother, Linda, treated her like how the evil stepmother mistreated Cinderella. When she turned 5 years old, she was made to work for Linda and her husband and received all sorts of curses and harsh words. She would often get hit by Linda, as she is forced to work and was expected to still be grateful because she had a house to live in. Aside from the physical and verbal abuse she had to endure from Linda on a daily basis, what was even worse was the sexual and physical abuse that Sal, Linda's husband, continually does to her ever since she was 2 years old. The unspeakable pain and trauma that she had to go through in that house seemed like hell to Katie, but in her young mind, she knew she did not have a choice. When she finally mustered up the courage, Katie attempted to tell Linda about the perverse acts of Sal, but Linda paid no heed. Instead, she accused Katie of lying. Katie was just 7 years old then, yet the life she knew at such a young, and supposedly innocent age, was cruel. All she ever knew was Linda's house, and the work that she needs to do for her merciless masters. They did not even send her to school, because they wanted to have a servant always at their disposal, 24/7. The very people that Katie could have leaned onto after her mom left, did much worse than her mom. She had no one else, until Big John came into the picture. John Esposito was known to be a big brother in their community. Being in the same neighborhood, he first got close to Katie's older half-brother, John Beers. He would often play with little John, frequently visiting Linda's house and spending time with the kids. Every time he paid a visit, he made sure he had something for Linda, so it did not take long before he befriended the rest of the family and gained their trust. He would sometimes take the kids to toy stores and shopping malls, buying gifts for them, and at times, taking them to his house to play. Katie not just found a big brother in Big John, but somehow Big John also became her father figure. He was her confidant, security, and rest from her toxic day-to-day life under the hands of the abusive couple. Quite a few times, Big John would tell Katie to sneak out of the house, so they could go to a toy store, but Katie was too afraid of Linda. She did not even dare to try. One day, on December 28, 1992, Big John went over to their house to drop off Katie's early birthday present, a Barbie dream house. It was Katie's 10th birthday in 2 days. And later that afternoon, he went back to help Katie assemble the dream house and also to talk to Linda, asking her if he could take Katie to an indoor arcade for an advance treat. Having earned Linda's favor, getting her permission was a walk in the park for Big John. However, to Katie's surprise, they weren't headed for the arcade. Instead, Big John brought her to the shopping mall and let her choose a video game she wanted to play. The next thing she knew, they were already in Big John's garage, at the back of his family's house, which he turned into his very own apartment. Now, his garage apartment had this game room, filled with all sorts of toys and gadgets, even completely stocked up on snacks. It was every child's dream room. However, there was one catch. There were no chairs in the room, and the only place to sit down was on Big John's bed, over at the far side of the room. The two of them were alone in the room, and being the smart girl that she was, Katie knew something was off, and started feeling uncomfortable. A little while later, Big John pulled her onto his lap, covered her mouth, and started to sexually assault her. Katie tried to resist him, but she was no match against the 42-year-old man. She was eventually pushed to the corner against a bookshelf which could roll sideways. Once rolled away, tucked under a carpet was a concrete slab that weighed 250 pounds. To lift it up, Big John set up a special mechanism that will be used to pull the heavy slab. This hole on the floor was like a vertical tunnel that dropped around 3 feet into the ground. He told Katie to get inside, but when she strongly resisted, he lifted her up and dropped her down into the tunnel. Katie was now 3 feet under, and as she looked over to her side, there was a horizontal tunnel that followed next. In a few seconds, Big John was beside her and pushed her to crawl into the horizontal tunnel, as he was following right behind her. As Big John opens the door from the small wooden tunnel, they emerge into a small room which Katie describes as a dungeon. The room was filled with those egg trays, making the whole room soundproof. In one of the corners was a toilet and a smaller box which was suspended 2 feet above the floor. It looked much like a coffin and had a small door with a padlock on it. Inside was one of those foldable sleeping mattresses, a television hanging at the corner, a couple of blankets, a chain, and a pair of handcuffs. Next, he forced Katie into recording a message for Linda, saying she had been kidnapped in the arcade and badly needed help. After he got what he wanted, Big John left Katie locked up in the dungeon, and made his way into the area of Spaceplex Arcade. He went into one of the payphone stations near the area, dialed in Linda's number, and played the recording over the phone.
It was a man kidnapped me and he had a knife. Oh no, here he comes, I gotta go.
Katie.
After the call, he immediately went to the Spaceplex Arcade, to pretend to be looking for Katie, then seeking help from the arcade staff in looking for her. After looking for Katie from every corner of the arcade, they called the cops to report the missing kid. This was Big John's attempt to lure the authorities and focus their investigation around the arcade. Linda, on the other hand, had also immediately reported Katie's case to the police after getting off the phone. The investigators identified possible suspects of the case: Marilyn, Katie's mother; Linda, Katie's godmother; Sal, Linda's husband; and Big John, Katie's friend. All of them showed concern and worry about Katie's whereabouts. However, when Dominic Varon, the chief investigator, talked to John and asked him what he thought had happened to Katie, his words brought chills down his spine. "Something dirty happened," was John's answer. Upon further investigation, they uncovered John's dark past. Apparently, Big John once tried to kidnap a 7-year-old boy at a mall back in 1978. He had pleaded guilty just so he could secure a lighter punishment for his crime. At once, the investigation zeroed in on Big John. With no evidence yet sufficient for his arrest, and still no signs of Katie, the police constantly kept an eye on Big John, and monitored his movements in and out of his home. Meanwhile, a few feet below them, Katie also kept herself updated with the news on the television. When she saw that a relentless effort to find her had been initiated, and the investigation began to shift its focus on Big John, Katie resolved that this was not the time to give up. Her renewed hope fueled her. Inside the dungeon, she did not sit down and do nothing. One day, as she was looking around the cramped room, she saw a set of keys left by Big John. Immediately, she took one of the keys and hid it under her pillow, hoping she wouldn't get caught. Now, ever since her abduction, Big John would go down every day to the dungeon and molest her, sometimes even more than once a day. However, as the authorities started to focus their investigation on Big John, it became harder and harder for him to escape their prying eyes. Gradually, his visits to Katie in the dungeon became less and less frequent. At one point, the authorities went inside Big John's garage apartment to talk to him and ask a few questions. He had no other choice but to oblige and cooperate with them. Upon hearing them from below, Katie did all her best to scream, hoping the police could hear her cries and know that she's there. Sadly, the authorities did not hear a single sound, but somehow, her sound managed to reach Big John's ears. As soon as the police stepped out of the house, he quickly went to Katie and put the chain around her neck, so she had nowhere else to go but stay still inside the smaller coffin-like box. Miraculously, however, the key that she kept under her pillow matched that of the chain's padlock, so Katie was able to unlock it and free herself from the bondage. Katie was extremely clever and mature for her age. Whenever she heard John coming, she would tie the chain again and lock herself. She even counted the links in the chain, and knew at which link the padlock was attached to, just so she could return the lock exactly as how it was placed. She was determined to stay alive and endure everything until she was rescued. She continued to keep a close watch on the progress of the search through the news. John had been in constant and consistent pressure for many days, and the police strengthened their surveillance on him, monitoring his every movement, day in and day out. Because of this, John tried to get Katie into posing in front of the camera with her eyes closed, as if she had died. But the smart young girl understood exactly what he planned to do, and knew that once she agreed to do just that, it would be the end for her. The search will stop. So, she strongly resisted and made sure he wouldn't be able to secure the picture. Katie stayed awake almost round the clock, out of fear of what John could do while she was asleep. She also did not eat the food that John would serve her, thinking that there might be something mixed up with the food that could knock her unconscious. She knew full well that John was already under a lot of pressure, so she decided to ask him thought-provoking questions. She asked him about his long-term plans, if he planned to lock her up in the dungeon forever. All he ever planned for was to marry Katie when she reaches 18 and build their own family. He no longer planned for anything else. Thus, Katie continued to feed his mind with scenarios that will complicate their situation in the future. Slowly, the pressure continued to pile up on John, until he could no longer carry it. On January 13, 1993, 17 long days after Katie was first reported as missing, he approached his lawyer and admitted every detail on what happened to Katie, even guiding them into the dungeon. When police rescued Katie in the dungeon, they did not expect to see a 10-year-old girl and her bright smile greeting them as they opened the door to the dungeon. Right then, they knew Katie could heal from this traumatizing ordeal. Big John was sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment for the kidnapping case, while the other charges for sexual, physical, and mental abuse were eventually dropped because he pleaded guilty. John died a natural death in his prison cell while serving his sentence. Sal, Linda's husband, also faced 12 years of imprisonment for the sexual abuse he had committed on Katie since she was a young kid. In order to stop the vicious cycle of abuse, Katie was no longer allowed to return to Linda, or even under Marilyn. A beautiful and loving family adopted her and loved her unconditionally. She eventually got married, and now lives in Pennsylvania with her husband and 2 kids. She continues to speak out for the abused, and has been vocal and courageous in sharing her story. She also began doing inspirational talks and even co-wrote a book entitled Buried Memories. After all that Katie had to go through as early as 2 years old, she had every chance and every reason to give up, yet it only took a little spark of hope for her to continue to fight. And yes, she fought smart indeed. Thank you for making it this far. If you liked this video, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We would greatly appreciate your support. Again, thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.